In this month's JOBSYNC Roundtable, bringing rigor to TA operations. This insightful panel featuring talent operations experts discussing the intricacies of building a TA operations function, scope, understanding the objectives of integrating of TA operations, managing scope creep, assess the outcomes, and budget, consider expenses and trade-offs such as tech, training, and resources. So enjoy the audio.
The 1966 Batman song. There are plenty of other suggestions out there.
All right, let's get started, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you might be today. Thank you for joining us today with our exciting panel. We're going to talk today about bringing rigor to your talent acquisition operations and what that means. There's a whole bunch of subtopics inside of this one, and we've held an hour for the day, and I am certain that there is about 10 hours of content inside just the heads of the folks that are joining us today. So we'll do our best to get as much information out and talk about lots of interesting things. So let's get started. A few things on the housekeeping front. This is recorded. We will send out a copy afterwards. You guys all are on mute. Everyone's camera is off. I say that because we do have a roundtable session. The next one is next week on Thursday, which we'll mention at the end of the hour. And those ones, your mic is hot and your camera is hot. So this is a little bit different. It is more of a webinar style. We are going to go for 1 hour. We will end at the top of the hour. If you have questions, please feel free to utilize the chat or the Q&A section. We will monitor both, and we'll do our best to answer them real time as opposed to holding them to the end, but we will have time at the end for additional questions. All right. Just a little bit, I promise this will be the only time I get pitchy, just a little bit about JOBSYNC. So we have built a hiring operations platform. We're really excited about what we've done here. We're trying to think about the world through the connective tissue in between all the pieces that is hiring operations. I'm stealing that from one of our panelists who just used that term a moment ago. This is a unified data platform. We are looking at how do you bring the recruiter experience and the candidate experience and elevate both? How do you raise all boats? And you do that by delivering far more candidates at scale, which allow companies to be able to hit hiring targets by being able to reach those candidates that they need to faster. Most of our clients accelerate their hiring velocity by about 50%, and they do save millions of dollars in ad spend annually. We try to accomplish this by working with the existing tech stack. So if you already have an ATS or a CRM, you already have job boards, your career site in play, we're not asking you to remove any of those existing technologies, but rather make them work together properly. If you want to learn more about what we're up to, please feel free to reach out to us, ask for a demo, hit us up in the chat. We will be happy to follow up with you afterwards. So a little bit about our panelists today. I'm actually going to have each person introduce themselves, if you don't mind. We'll start with Ben. Ben Aber is from G-Fiber. He's the TA operations leader. And Ben, I think you have not only an interesting gig today, but previously your story to where you're at is actually probably very interesting for our folks. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me here today, Leah. I'm Ben Aber. I'm here in Austin, Texas. I've been leading the recruiting ops function for G-Fiber now for almost 2 years. The organization has gone on the in-housing journey for just about that long. And I've worked under the Alphabet umbrella for about a decade now. And so my career has been largely in strategy and operations, which has taken me from doing things in recruiting, which is my recent stint. And before this, I was in vendor operations, managed service providers, working for different clients, and all on the how do we scale, how do we mature operational models, and thinking about what that looks like as companies try and do outsourcing. And early in my career, I started in the retail space. So very, very much on the operations side in retail stores and in the corporate space. And that is all translated into process improvement, thinking about and using data to help inform and make decisions, and built a career doing that. So I think the one thing that I will say is I've never actually been a recruiter a day in my life. I've been versions of that. I've been hiring manager, sourcer, that kind of thing. But doing that job hasn't yet come my way. And I love what I do. I love this space. I think this is a space that's going to transform what's been a long overdue transformation in terms of how we think about how hiring has typically been done and how hiring will be done in the future.
Awesome, thank you. Next, Allison Wademan. Allison is the former TA operations leader at Randstad, SourceRight, and Broadbridge. And Allison, would you mind giving us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am, my name is Allison. I'm a TA operations leader. I've been in the space for, we'll just say over 10 years, because that covers it. I am super passionate about the candidate experience and helping teams grow and scale as they mature. Very early in my career, I started as a recruiter and then had dipped my toe into the generalist world, which I found my passion in TA ops, but I love to bring those perspectives to the different teams that I join because I think it helps to give those teams a well-rounded view of their growth and ultimately sets them up for success.
Awesome. Next, we have Stephanie Basinger. Stephanie is the former TA operations leader at Klaviyo and HubSpot. And Stephanie, would you like to give us a little background?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie calling in from Las Vegas, Nevada, sunny Las Vegas. A lot of my background is I've been in the TA ops space similarly, Allison, over 10 years. And when I kind of think of the through line in recruiting ops, is I've definitely been kind of the first ops person in a number of environments. And so a lot of building from scratch, determining how do I build a team. I think the biggest one too is how do I communicate the value of a team to the leadership? I think it's been something I've been up against at multiple companies. And so just excited to keep being able to do that. I love this space so much. And I'm just seeing the community grow a lot too in the last 10 years. So excited to be part of this panel.
Thank you. Last, but certainly not least, actually the inspiration behind this panel is Jeremy Lyons. Jeremy is the founder of the Rec Ops Collective. If you do not subscribe to his newsletter, I'm going to give a free plug here. You should definitely do that. It's full of interesting tidbits. He's got a really great collection of information, advice, thoughts, perspective, arguments, a little bit of everything. And Jeremy and I connected through LinkedIn in part because of this newsletter, and that's how we pulled this group together today. So Jeremy, I'm going to have you introduce yourself, and then we'll jump right in.
Well, it's hard to follow up that introduction, but hi, Jeremy Lyons calling in from Los Angeles today. I've been in the recruiting operations space for 6 years professionally, but I will say being the child of an executive recruiter and being the child of a unit production manager, line producer in television, I have always had an intense interest in understanding how all of the pieces come together as one, and really just how recruiting has evolved now as the technology has evolved, as the education around it has evolved. And I come from a background of being a teacher and also being a data analyst and a scheduler and handling all that nitty gritty. So much like Stephanie, I've been first person in to build, and I am just grateful that I've got great relationships with everybody on this panel because they all influence me and keep me grounded.
Thank you. And my name is Leah Daniels, and I am the Chief Commercial Officer here at JOBSYNC. So I'm excited for the next 50 minutes as we jump into this conversation. I will tell you guys there are exactly 2 slides, so we are not going to be in slideware for the day, but I did want to start with a little bit of a foundation, and then we'll get into the meat of the conversation. So Jeremy built this fun maturity curve, and then I had someone else on our team make it pretty. But not that yours wasn't pretty. It was very nice.
Look, I'm in recruiting operations. I'm not in design. I will tell people.
That wasn't one of the like, that's not on the list of requirements for, no?
Sometimes, but
Some days.
Some days ending at one.
Depends if it's Tuesday. So Jeremy, I thought we could start here, right? This is actually fun because you and I end up having this conversation, and then the next week in your newsletter, this came out. And my read on this is it's a little bit of a riff on a few of these that are out there. It's a little bit on the GitLab maturity model. James Polino, who writes a great book on recruiting operations. If y'all have not read that, definitely think about it. I think it's very affordable on Amazon. He has not paid me to plug this in any way. But he's got a version of this. And so I would love if we could start by like, let's talk about what this is, why you think about the world through this lens. And then from here, we're going to jump into some questions.
Yeah. So I think one of the big things about this was it more or less started as a pun on all the different names that recruiting operations has picked up. You have on one side some people who like to refer to it as rec ops for recruiting operations. Sometimes you say it's a recruitment operations, depending on where in the world you're living. Some people refer to them as ROPS teams, and some teams refer to them as TA ops teams. And so the maturity curve, it kind of came together more or less out of the conversation that we were having about kind of how do all the names play into sort of the rows that is this space. And so the idea of rec ops, definitely pun intended, is that you have the idea that usually that first generation of recruiting operations person at your company is going to be there to really undo or build that process that may or may not have already been there. And so you're kind of wrecking the house in a way. And that's where that rec ops piece comes in. Then,
and that happens for good reason, right? If you think about like on day one of a TA team being stood up, rec ops isn't part of the equation, right? You've got your singular recruiter. Maybe now you have 2 recruiters, and you have 6 recruiters. You might have a leader. And this really becomes a side of the desk activity. And that side of the desk might be one of your managers. It might be one of your recruiters. It's probably split between a lot of them, actually. And so it's not a cohesive perspective. It's a like operation by desperation.
Yeah, well, and I think it becomes a really good, you touch on a lot of really good points there, which is a lot of times the rec ops pieces, and we're starting to actually see less of that. And a lot of conversations, people are now actually starting to really focus on what's the holistic picture that I'm going to build at the beginning, which is good to see. Because I think for a lot of older companies, they started this function came out and everybody sort of went, oh, we want that. That's kind of a cool thing. We need to have this person because it's sort of keeping up with the Joneses. It's like, well, they have a rec ops person and their rec ops person is making all these things better. We need that because they're going to do that. And it's whether or not we like it or not, sometimes recruiting operations people, we come in and we're expected to work magic, and we're expected to work that magic very quickly in the same sorts of ways that other people have. And I think that's where we also started getting that evolution where you have the rec ops where you're wrecking things. Then you have your rec cops where it's like you've already built everything. Everything's been established. Now you just kind of have to get people onto the rails. And most of the time people don't like getting on rails. They feel it's restrictive. They will fight back, not because they don't like the idea or agree with the idea. It's just not what they're used to. And breaking up those processes works. I think then you get into an area where you start calling it ROPS, where it's like people start to have that aha moment where you're starting to say like, look, I did all these things for you. And if you follow the rules, you will start to see the benefit. So please follow the rules because now we're getting that good data. Now we're getting those good processes. Now we're getting that good feedback. And then I think once you've kind of, everybody's gotten on board, you get to that Zen stage, you get to that Tau ops or DAO ops, where, people, that chaos might still sort of be there, but it's not that same sort of frenetic, hectic energy where it's like, let me drop everything I'm doing to go and fix and put out this fire, that oftentimes is just the fires that we normally deal with, all the little fires in our eyes.
Yeah, I think
Anyone made it to that stage?
no, but listen, it's like Maslow's higher needs, right? We're all aspirational at some point in time. It's interesting, right? We work with a lot of companies where when we meet them, the entire situation is on fire. Because there is a reality, you are always going to have small fires. But small fires are actually manageable. That's why you have a firefighting team, you have a truck, you can get there, you can fight it. But when the whole world is on fire, where do you start, right? And that is the challenge, is you want to get to a part where you are singularly firefighting. You have a hiring manager challenge. You have a singular pricing problem, or not pricing, but a salary problem. You have one part of the organization that has a regulatory change that you have to go deal with, right? Those are costs of doing business, right? That's just regular life. It's when all of them are on fire at the same time, you're like, well, goodness, where do I even start? So let's start with, and here, let me pull this off. So let me stop sharing for a second. So let's start with the big question. Day one, you're into an organization. Where do you start? What does the first 90 days look like? Who wants to take this one? I'm happy to pick on you guys. Oh, Ben wants it. Oh, Ben, it's all you, man. Is it like bringing a newborn home?
It is. It's like bringing a newborn home. I love this question because it's almost none of what's on the slide that we were just talking about. It is primarily talking to everyone and anyone that will give you their ear for 15, 20, 30, 60 minutes. Really listening and understanding from all of the different perspectives. And so we talked about candidates, we talked about hiring managers, recruiters, interviewers, executives. Like, give me a state of how you're feeling about the world, and just really digging in and understanding what's top of mind. The one question I like to ask in those conversations, just to be an icebreaker, what does good look like? In your mind, what does good look like and feel like for you, for the organization, for your team? And through that one question, you will find that the conversation can go in 20 different ways. And if you come back to that question 6, 12 months later, after you've done that initial assessment in those first 90 days, you'll find that it's a very different type of conversation. So for me, it's the first 90 days is document and listen to everyone and everything. And only if there's data, go take a look at some of that. But I would say the first one is conversations with everybody, then look at if and what that data says. And I say do it in that order, because if you start by looking at the data, you will be tempted to go into the conversations with some sort of bias or thought about what a solution might be.
Well, and how much is that data accurate?
I can add on a bit to what Ben, completely agree. And just once we've hit that phase, that would be my first step too, is also recognizing that there is a thing of change fatigue, there is decision fatigue, and it can be really tempting to kind of see all this low-hanging fruit and want to make a lot of changes. I've been there, I've made that mistake. I think what I found actually being really early in rec ops at a few companies is finding a bit of, when you see that data that Ben talks about, like, where is there going to be some places where the business is going to see value? And as tempting as it might be to fix some things that might be uncomfortable or would be nice to haves, like really pinpointing a very small list of where there would be business value and what you might want to put on your roadmap for the first 90 days. And that could be things for your recruitment team. If the business is going through a lot of changes, can you actually start local, and what's going to make a really big enablement impact for your recruitment team? But keeping that list quite small in the first 90 days is what if I could go back and tell my old self. That's the advice I'd give my previous self.
The part with the recruiter, right? Do you see that too as some bridge building, right? Because to your point, change fatigue is real. Change is, you're not just changing, you're actually taking their babies away from them and saying, no, I will raise them now. Even though you maybe were doing a very poor job as the parent, they're mine now, right? So is there a part of just satisfying some of those business requirements where you're also bridge building with the recruiting team in order to give yourself that, I always call it a bank account, right? You got to make some deposits before you pull those withdrawals, especially as a new person in. Is that part of the mental model that you use? I feel like, Jeremy, you want to jump in so bad.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll follow up after Stephanie, but
I was just going to say, I've always considered myself part of the recruitment team. And so I'm joining their team. And so that is the bridge building, learning everything that they do in their day-to-day world and connecting my work to enabling them, I think helps build that bridge. And coming in with that kind of philosophy has proven really helpful for me.
And building on that, I think combining both what Ben and Stephanie has said, I think one of the things that rec ops people often face when we come in is that we're there to solve all problems. And
of course you are.
And yeah, I mean, of course we're there to be the magic people and to do everything, to sort of, we wave our hands and it's easy. And it's not. I mean, all of us have a different skill set. And so I think one of the things in the conversation that's also very good to have when you're talking with the recruiting team is to find out, like, what were pieces that other people owned and how did they own them? And do they still want to be involved? Because much to your point, some people might just be as, like, here, take it. I've been doing it. I don't want to do it anymore and I'm done with it. And some people are like, you know what, actually, I see myself building skills in this area that I think are going to be really important to my long-term career. And you can inadvertently, if you come in and you sort of kick in the door and say, this is mine now, like I am the captain now, that people on your team will rebel and sort of feel like you've cut them out of the conversation, that their opinions no longer matter. And now you're dealing with the human element of what we deal with, because the human element in recruiting operations, it is always hard, as we are dealing with people, and people are naturally combustible. They can misread an email or a text message or like a Slack message that we've sent, which, was just totally innocuous. It's like, do you need help on this? No. And everybody's like, oh, wow, they're getting on me. So I think it's one of those things where you have to also inventory, what are people doing and do they want to still be involved? Because it will help you continue to build out sort of that initial social capital that you're going to need once you've identified all of the projects that you've identified, and you're trying to keep that list small because, now you can start to get into that area where you're delegating.
If I can add something to that too, I think the other thing that's important to remember is communication, iterative communication. I think, you really want to talk to the teams that you're working with, hear what they have to say, listen to, all of their concerns, where they want to participate or not, but also communicating that back to them, right? You don't want to just take all of that information and process it and work in a bubble. You really need to tell them what you heard and why you're focusing on the small pieces that you are focusing on, because that then they will still feel heard. They will understand that it's a part of a bigger picture, and it's, while you're not working on it right away, you've still heard them. They are still, it is still important in the hierarchy of things.
The biggest challenge, I would think, I've never done this job, so I want to start by saying that, so I am but an outside observer, is that the number of people you have in a recruiting organization is almost never the number you need, right? You're already working at a deficit before recruiting operations shows up. So it's not like you're going to walk into an organization with a fully funded team, big budgets, balloons, parties, the whole thing, right? You are also going to run fairly thin, right? So there is a shocking number of things that I would argue fall under the realm of recruiting operations. And all of you have said, I got to make the list small. I got to make the list small. How big's the list? What do you sacrifice and what do you focus on? I know that's a really hard question because it's not going to be the same every time, but I have a feeling that there's a handful of things that are always fairly the same at the beginning. Who wants to jump in? Ben, you're nodding aggressively.
My mind goes immediately to one thing, which is the things that are burning wildfires. And to me, burning wildfires are compliance issues. Anything that's not like going to get us in legal trouble, like solve those first. That always makes the list as a
We do like
as a
to
top
break the
priority.
law here in recruiting. I don't know if you know this, but I am very familiar with the amount of law breaking we like to do in recruiting. Not on purpose, but a little bit on purpose because desperation for candidates sometimes outweighs niggling legal requirements.
Yep. And then the other things for me that round out the smaller sense of the list, besides the legal ones, are things where there's vast, and people might disagree with me, things where there is vast variation, where there is a large set of inconsistency, make it onto that list, because to our earlier point, looking at data, if you've got that inconsistency, all of that data is probably going to be almost worthless in terms of where you need to go next. So documenting and putting those on the list of, okay, where do I need to tighten these up so I can start getting some data to tell me where to go next after that.
Something that has been, I agree, something that's been a complete pattern for me as I'm thinking through have been two things. Ben, you touched on one is consistency in some sort of pipeline data. How high can you bring that data so that you can at least have some milestones? And then the second is around understanding headcount goals that just very, very tactical that has come up, I think, in 4 of the last roles that I've had. And the way I look at those things is those are very big investments up front that if a little bit of time in creating some consistency or some sort of process is an investment in setting you up for what would happen, that long list you mentioned, you can start to nest that long list under some really big themes. If you can invest in that up first, you're investing in the future asks you're going to have. So those are 2 big areas that I'm sure everyone on here has experienced at least one of those, but those seem to be a pattern for me.
Allison, you look like you wanted to jump in at the beginning.
Oh, I was going to say, Ben, I totally agree. Compliance is number one, and data is definitely a very, very tight next step, because if you don't have the ability to see where you've started, it's really hard to show success down the line. So part of that challenge is data integrity and consistency in defining what that each data point means. So just here to agree.
What are the top data pieces, like the pieces of data you need to get right? Like because that actually is data is this big, maybe bigger. So you can't get it all right all the time. So where do you even start with data? What's the thing that's the burning data in, data out, so it's not garbage in, garbage out? Oh, that was on the list I sent you guys ahead of time. Trick question.
Well, I mean, Allison, if you want to take it, I'll let you take it.
Go for it, Jeremy.
I think one of the things too, look, there's you can look at the data because you can look to see, is it a break in process? Is it a break in compliance? Or is it a break in the actual way that we've been capturing this data to begin with? And I think that that's something that whenever I go and I look at the data and I'm trying to understand, like, what is the actual active story we're trying to tell with our data? Because every company is going to be thinking about that in a very different way. Some companies are going to be like, look, we want to understand why, and then it'll come out in those conversations, why our time to fill is X, up over here. Other companies are going to be like, look, we've locked that down. We think we have it really like spot on, but we're trying to understand why our candidate NPS is absolutely in the trash. So every company is going to dictate to you kind of and you're going to hear it, is what the story that they're trying to tell with their data is and what they're trying to do with it. Because as being a part of the recruiting team, sometimes it's a fight for, we want data that's going to back up our fight for existing and keeping our head count at where it's at because of where the goals that we're going to need to do. Some companies, your recruiting team is much more stable and in a better place. And so you can't just sort of say like, okay, this is the data that I immediately go and look at, because the stories are going to be different. And how you're going to use that data is also going to be different.
So if I'm hearing you, there's a couple of things there. So one is, what are the hiring goals in general? Like, what is the business goal and what are the hiring goals behind it? You got to understand that piece, right? Because if we ignore that, the rest of this doesn't matter. Secondary, where have they already identified a pain point that there is a spotlight on one way or another? Whether or not it is the right pain point or not might actually be a secondary story here, right? Because sometimes they're like, this is such a problem. And you're like, but sure, but everywhere else too. Like, you're kind of even with everybody else, but okay. So you get that, how does that then turn into a vision, a mission, metrics, KPIs? How do you then go from, I've heard what your problems are, I see the issues, I've maybe even gotten to a part where I've got some consistency so I can pretend like the data is going to be better soon. I say that because I know recruiters. And now I'm going to turn that into the plan, how we go forward and how we then make a difference.
I think documenting is it's such a small detail, but it's so important, is to document what your processes are today and what they look like. I think specifically in terms of data and data integrity, you want to build an audit step into your process, because to your point, Leah, recruiters love them dearly, but don't always like to follow the process the way you've built it. So building that audit step really helps.
Art.
It is. It's hard. I know it's hard work. But building that audit step into your process is going to make a world of difference in helping to ensure that what you're documenting as true, as this is what we do, is in fact happening. And I think that's really vital to be successful.
Yeah. And one of the critical conversations to add to that too is, I'm just thinking, I tend to have I can get from the start to the finish like very fast. And so I'd want to talk to whoever your head of TA is, your head of people, and align with them on what their goals are. What is this team being held accountable for? And in what time increments? And then, using like really good curiosity question answering, or if you have a data point at the end that we need to hit our hiring capacity to 95%, what are the input questions that are going to dictate if you can do that? And that helps you back into your plan. Yeah, I think that aligning on the overarching goals of the team, and that helps with, I think, Allison, when you talked about communication and bringing that back to the team, if you're kind of aligned with everyone has the same goal, you get to kind of bring that back. Like, we're going to focus on, new kickoff forms, because one of the goals we have for the team is maybe around quality of hire. And we know from benchmarking that starting in a really good quality top of funnel, we want to run this experiment for the next 6 months. And you can bring that actually back to the recruiting team and say, we all have actually the same goals. Here's how I'm going to support that. Like, they have all other actions they have to do too, but you're all working within the same, milestones.
Stephanie, you just pointed out something really interesting, which is you want to understand the goals, right? We want to have 95% of our hiring capacity or whatever it might be, right? and this is just a curiosity question, I actually don't have a perspective on it. Do you ask the opposite question, which is what happens if we don't make that 95%? What is the impact to the business if we're at 90 or 85? Is that something that's part of that conversation? And how does that then play out? Because I think it's an interesting behavior pattern that recruiting has gotten into. It's almost like we're disconnected from the outside, from the outcomes of the business. Like it's exemplified in this example, right? Most companies who have hourly workforce pay overtime if they don't have enough bodies, right? They'll pay overtime out. But overtime is not attached to recruiting. It's attached to the business units out in the market. So it's like, well, that's their money, not mine. So how does that work? How does that conversation come about where you're asking what if we miss, and what's the impact, and how do we feel it, and how do we overcome it? It's a big question.
Yeah. Happy to pass that over to anyone if they have a thought.
I was going to jump in and say, I think this is why, I mean, I jokingly say it's like Rec Ops starts with why. And I think the why questions don't just end on positives. They end on sort of the what ifs scenario playing, because that's the strategic part about what we do. And that's the impact of what we do. And to your point, I mean, if we don't, to take it back, company is paying more out in overtime because there aren't enough people to do the work. If there aren't enough people to do the work, is that a recruiting problem or is that a business problem? Because maybe the business isn't approving new headcount for that people, or they're not approving new contractor headcount for that. And then you go back another step and you say, well, are they not approving it because maybe it's something political? Maybe they don't like a certain person and they're trying to manage them out. Maybe they're trying to try a new method and they're trying to test those things. And then, or it's like on the recruiting side, maybe it's like we didn't find the right people, but is that a recruiting problem, or is that this is just a combative hiring manager issue that we're now dealing with? So there are all these multitudes of different things that feed into it that recruiting would gladly go back to. And I think this is, and help with. And I think it's one of the reasons why I always point out, like, people are talking about quality of hire and they're trying to talk about who owns quality of hire. And part of that ends up falling on people pointing at recruiting and saying, well, recruiting is responsible for quality of hire. Well, we're getting our job descriptions from the business. And if the business isn't giving us the information we need, is that recruiting's fault to just, like, again, work magic? So you have to understand all these different things that are interplaying within the recruiting world, and you have to understand them very technically on the Rec Ops side to be able to translate those things into not only system requirements, but the human components that you need to appease to get people to understand exactly where you're going and understand the why. And I think that's why North Stars really work in our space, because ultimately that keeps people focused and it keeps people understanding exactly where we're going and understanding the why.
Anyone else want to jump in on that? I'm gonna throw up if I can again, our little deck here. One other slide I want to show, because there's nothing better to do on it. Okay, 1 second. You guys are looking at my screen, but not what I want you to be looking at. Y'all see that? Does that work? Did it work? So it's gonna work. Because nothing better to do on a Tuesday night than to try to put down all of the things that come up when you query the world of what falls under TA operations. So I did my best work here with all of the pieces, and I'm sure I've missed some for sure. And how I have seen TA operations people start to phase in and start owning some of these. And this is probably not perfectly aligned with what your experiences are. And I think Allison pointed out right at the beginning, I've missed the most important piece, which is all the interconnections and the tactics and the fabric behind all of this. I need actually a big swath of fabric. When you're thinking about the world, right, and when you take on talent operations, for me, something like this is a really great way to illustrate two things. One, just the breadth and scope of the role itself, But there's a secondary thing in here, which is a little harder to see, which is the varying skill sets you need to be able to manage this breadth and scope of activities. The question for the panel is, how do you then go to and articulate all of this out to the business? How do you help them understand that the role is bigger than a person for sure, and bigger than even a person's skill sets, and how you're going to therefore tackle some, but maybe not other things? How do you determine that scope? Because some of it is going to be determined, I think, by your own skill sets and aptitude. Am I right? Wrong? Thoughts?
I will say, Leah, that I've told you that scope is a challenge for me personally. So I get excited about all of the things. So I want to do it all, but I can't because I'm one person. So I think it's really important to understand, though, that scope for TA Ops is really dependent on the growth and where the organization is in terms of growth and maturity, right? So TA Ops may own a lot more for a smaller organization, and that will change, as it's not a question of when, but if, but when. So I think it's important in looking at this and reviewing all of the different pieces and parts. It's really important to build a review process for yourself, once a year or whatever timing works best for your organization. You want to talk to your stakeholders, talk to your key people that you're working with, and say, okay, well, this is what I'm doing today. Does it still make sense, or do we need to expand or break this apart? And I think that's
How often do you do
going
that?
to help. How often? I mean, it really depends, I think, on the person, on the organization. Once a year makes sense, and I would be lying if I told you that I actually did it once a year. But we can be aspirational, and I think it really depends on the speed of growth of the organization itself.
Taking a look at this, is there anything you would just say, no, just TA Ops should not take that on? We do, but we shouldn't.
I don't think so.
You're being recorded. It's okay.
I think this is really, it encompasses a lot. I don't know that it's exclusive. I can tell you, owning TA Ops, I've taken on more things that maybe don't fall naturally in the TA space, but just because they make sense at the time. And again, it's probably my overexcitement of, hey, this can be done and I can do it better. So I think it's not exclusive.
Does anyone else want to contribute to this?
This is a very humbling slide. I think I said that before we joined, to actually see this all laid out. And for those that are ops folks, like I hope a lot of folks on the call, like how fun. Like I just want to call that out too. Like it is so beyond stressful sometimes, but looking at this, like when I get to see all these different areas that I get to learn about when it comes from a business, like it is like actually quite fun and interesting, like jack of all trades, but a master of none. But
better to be a master of one.
Yeah. I will say the biggest, for those that might be out there who are running a team, one of the big lessons I learned is I like the color coding. I've done the similar exercise. It's a very big exercise if you are running the recruiting ops team, to bring people in who, to Jeremy's point, like can actually be an expert or want to grow in one of these areas. And you get the space and the capacity when you start managing and leading these functions, whether that's a person who's running them or the teams if you've delegated them into cohorts. But truly being a rec ops leader in this space, if you don't have to do all of these things, like bring people in who are experts in them, and then your expertise is actually channeling that expertise, which is beyond meta over here. But that was a big lesson for me, is to actually back out of the day-to-day work of this and let experts come in. And that became almost a new role of mine, is an enablement leader.
In that way, are you pulling recruiters into TA operations, or are you pulling people with different skill sets that may not have a recruiting background?
I've been really lucky to get to hire folks, bringing people in. I think when you have a lot of times coordination has sat within my remit. And what we've actually done is pulled a slide that didn't look this beautiful, but pulled something like this up and said, hey, teams, like who wants a level up opportunity? Does this kind of fit within scope? And then we would have someone else volunteer to coach and mentor through it. But some of these things are not, to my earlier point, like the thing that a business is going to see critical value fast. They're actually things we can experiment with. And you as a leader kind of spreading those out, you can actually help other people grow in these areas. You can be a really big like coach and leader in an ops role if you have the luxury of time and folks that are interested in wanting to take these things on.
And I think one of the other things to point out in all of this too is, I mean, TA, and I've done this when I've managed people on my team or coached people outside of it, given like mentored people outside of it. I think ultimately too, a lot of people start as recruiting coordinators because they get told they like people and they get told that it's a great opportunity to be able to talk to people. And then you end up finding different aspects within TA ops that you actually feel called towards. And one of the other things too that I tell people is like, what you start out as, build those skill sets. And you might find you want to get over into an entirely different aspect of the business. And this just happens to be your introduction to that. I have worked with people on the FP&A side who started out as recruiting coordinators, people in marketing who have started out as recruiting coordinators. I have talked to people who and advised people where they're like, you know, I really love working with the data, and I know that there's this perception around recruiting and I want to get more towards the revenue side, become data analysts, point people in the other direction. And I think that's a beautiful part about what we do is there is so much that we do and so much that we touch and so many different people we have to talk to. I mean, you have it right there. You've got your HRIS liaison, you got your legal liaison. I mean, sometimes even you're the marketing liaison if your employer branding doesn't sit within your recruiting team. So there are these things where it's like there are all these different touch points and there's all these opportunities. And I think one of the big things in being a TA ops leader is how can you connect people to their next opportunity? It's like almost the conversation you have with your coordinators if you're managing them is like, okay, cool. We spent if we have a 30-minute one-on-one, we spent the first 15 minutes talking about what's the tactical stuff you're running through. Now let's spend the back 15 talking about where we're trying to get you to. And let's continue to have that conversation, because if those opportunities emerge, we want to get you in front of those people so that they can see the great work that you do.
There's a quick question on the chat I want to ask, and then I have one big question to round us out for today because we're flying through time. The question is around the proper intake information on the quality of hire. Who owns that? Is that recruiter? Is that recruiting ops? Is that the hiring manager? Who defines the quality of hire, and how do you do that consistently?
I mean, I really opened a can of worms with that example. Sorry to throw anyone off, but I'll just give it's not one person, which I know is not the answer. I think finding a team, not even be your team, you do not have to be in charge of it either, but finding the group of people to create some definitions would be a place to start, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the question and my immediate response is is it the recruiter's responsibility for asking the right questions? All right, so who's arming the recruiter with the right questions to ask? But is it also the responsibility of the hiring manager to come in and say, like, this is how I'm going to define success, and they're doing that? Is it somebody else? So it's a committee thing. It's not just on a recruiter to be like, you're the detective, and now like we're going to throw the case out because you didn't ask this one specific question at this one specific time. That's just putting the onus and responsibility and a lot of pressure on one part that might not necessarily be the part that you need to put the pressure on.
All right. We can't have this conversation if we don't talk about everybody's favorite buzzword. Buzzwords? Acronym? something.
Does that good?
Where does AI sit as talent operations is? I mean, I think talent operations is still in its nascent form. So where does AI fit in all of this? Is it part of your edict? Is it not part of your edict? Is it actually going to make your world better or worse? Both. Why can't it be both? Who's brave?
I mean, I think AI would sit, in my view, it would fall under the rec tech umbrella, right? Where it kind of you definitely have an adjacent world in rec ops. It's going to permeate everywhere. I think overall, best to embrace it and to see how we can really leverage AI for a number of different things, right? It's going to impact candidate experience. It's going to impact recruiter enablement. It will certainly impact data and analytics and the ability to kind of process all of your data if it's good data. So I think it is TA ops adjacent, if that kind of makes sense.
Anybody else have a perspective on it? While you're thinking, jump in.
Yeah, I think the important question, yes, I think it's going to be part of our lives. It's going to be part of our tech stack. It already is. Your tool, every tool you probably is starting to build. You're starting to see, generate with AI. But the thing that I want to think about is just like, at what point of the process, and to use Jeremy's kind of rec ops question, is like, why? Why are we using it here? Did you see like a break in a process? Do we not have enough capacity in one area? Just being like clear on the why. And I think for all of us too, it's like why we're trying it right now. It might fail. It might not hit the results you want, but like, this is kind of the fun of this job, is we get to be really experimental. And so why are we using it at this particular place? And how will we monitor if it's actually hitting the results that we want? And you get to kind of set up that framework.
One of my favorite parts about AI right now is that we are not just experimenting with AI, we're also experimenting with our own ability to consume what it will do or could do, and how we as organizations are going to react and manage, right? I think there's a lot there to unpack in of itself, right? And I happen to be in the group of people that thinks that AI isn't going to make less work, but more work, just in different places. And that word compliance that we started with, Ben, coming right back at you, man. I can't wait. It's coming. It's coming in hot. We just don't know when or where and which states. And it's definitely going to be at the state level. So, for anybody who operates a recruiting organization that is more than one state, this is about to get real interesting. So thinking about it, right, as we adopt and experiment and manage, and we think about what are we going to need for resources from a go forward, like how are you guys starting to think about that and also communicate that, right? Because that's a big communication piece for you.
And it looked like you had unmuted on the last question to talk, but
no.
So here's what I was also going to say to this. I think one of the things that I haven't seen a lot of conversations talk about when it comes to AI is actually how is AI changing our human behavior and changing our communication. I think one of the things that I've seen, especially now that more people are using prompts and learning how to write prompts and how to be constructive with it, is there is an emphasis now on the actual words that you are choosing, because you are going to get a different answer from your prompt depending on the vocabulary that you are choosing to address that. You will also get different answers if you're giving people roles. And I think the implication that I've seen on that is that now when people are asking questions to other people, you're starting to see a lot more of a direct way that is almost prompt-esque to get either a response or to give people enough context and color to get to that next piece, to say like, this is how AI is going to is changing things. And then again, in our space too, it becomes, work is going to be moved. It's just a dependence on like what work is going to be moved. Are we going to see people now needing to be less data? Like, are you going to need to understand all the data pieces, or are you just going to need to be able to read the data pieces? I think people tend to think of language actually has three parts. It's you've got your reading, you've got your writing, and you've got your ability to speak/listen. And I think that those three parts, you're seeing different elements of that right now with AI tools and how AI is impacting things already, even if it isn't already there.
Ben, do you want to round us out?
Yeah, I really like that, Jeremy. I think the other thing I would say is it's already changing the way that we interact with one another. It's changing the way that we interact with, look at job searches, the way that we do intake meetings, we craft the written word in terms of how we're matching resumes to jobs, right? And the way that we do those things is going to be very, very different. And again, to Jeremy's point, I think one of the most important things is what questions are going to elicit the answers or the responses that we think we're going to need. So the words are going to be very important, but the questions themselves are probably even more important than the answers that you think you want to generate.
It's interesting because I had the pleasure of reading 90 entries for a contest the other day in our space. And when you read them over 48 hours, something else happens that's interesting, which is you can tell which ones were written by AI. So what you guys all haven't said, but I'm going to add, is your ability to edit just got that much more important. So it's not just the question. It's the ability to then consume what it produces and edit it so it doesn't sound like the race to mediocrity and the same as everybody else. Anyway, it is on the hour. I promised we would end on time. So I want to start by thanking all of you guys, Jeremy, Ben, Stephanie, Allison. Thank you so much for your time, your knowledge, your enthusiasm, all of it. Really appreciate that. For everybody who's still on the call, thank you guys so much for joining us. If you're interested, on next Thursday on the 14th, which is not the Ides of March, but it is Einstein's birthday and Pi Day, we have Bill Mussman. He is the VP of Talent from Emeritus Christie. They are an insurance organization. They're mission-driven. They help the poorest Americans get insurance. They also hire many of them. And he is going to talk about how you tie your mission to your business outcomes and how you do that, operationalizing that through your recruiting team. So I'm really excited. We'll send a note out afterwards. That's going to be at 11 a.m. Eastern time. Hope all you guys can join us. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Looking for your next HR technology role? Go to your browser, type in hrtechjob.com and browse hundreds of jobs with the best HR technology vendors. HR tech professionals finally have a dedicated job marketplace to find work or be found. Sign up for job alerts or post a resume. Discover jobs with companies like Workday, Phenom, HiBob, Deal, and more. You'll even find HR tech roles with employers in case you want to work with managing HCM or HRIS platforms. HR Tech Job, the only job market for HR technology careers. Join us at hrtechjob.com.